Hey, wow. I was trying to remember your name. I didn't remember it right now.
Oh, they have a big, you know when you go to the dentist and stuff? She explained everything. Yeah, she told me about this. Because the knife's in there, she could it's kind of funny.
I'll go with you for sure.
Watch it. Hey, take a to your donut.
Hey, there he is. I'm sitting here getting the money. Oh, I know that you
Yeah. Well, that's what was so funny. They said, we're not raising taxes, but we're closing Liverpool. It's like, anytime you close Liverpool, let me raise taxes. No, it's acquisition where you get right on that one piece of machinery. That's one that's like now.
Good morning.
Diane's not gonna have the reports ready next week. Those are the smallest tomatoes I have ever seen. Look at these teeny dudes. They're good. Diane, I stay out of the life. I'm married to a woman.
Well, good morning. Welcome to worship on this beautiful summer Sunday morning. We're so glad to have you with us today here at Collinsville Christian Church. I don't know about you all, but boy, I mean, summer has just slid right by. School starts Thursday? Thursday. Golly. Who here grew up when school didn't start until after Labor Day? Yes, remember that? Gosh. And it seems like it gets earlier every year. So school starts Thursday, and we're excited for that. Oh, I do have a special announcement. If the floor is sticky, and it is, it's because we put a special coating down because we want to know when you're walking around. No, that's not true. It's because we are utilizing this room the way that it was meant to be utilized. And obviously, you remember the story when COVID came around, we needed more space for our teenage student ministry, and so this was out, and we couldn't afford to build. And so we voted and took the pews out. And so Wednesday night, we kept the kids inside because it was super, super, super hot this past Wednesday. And we did this activity that they really enjoy. You'll see up here called Marshmallow War. And unfortunately, wait a minute, one of our air conditioners decided not to work Wednesday night, which resulted in the marshmallows melting quickly. So there's some marshmallow goo left on the floor. You just walk around and get it all sticky on your feet and take it home. That will be great. But no, Heather's mopping the floor and getting it up, but it's a slow process. So we apologize for that. But anyway, that's why your feet are going. So let's do the and stand up and say good morning to some people, and then we'll get into our worship time. What? Oh, it was that side. Diane called it. I got that song you sent me.
Every battle, through every heartbreak, through every circumstance, I believe that you are my fortress. Oh, you are my portion. You are my hiding place. I believe you are the way. The life, I believe you are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am who you say I am. Who the Son sets free, oh, is free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God, yes I am. Chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. I am who you say I am. You say I am. The sun sets free, oh, it's free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God, yes I am. And I hear the Savior say, thy strength indeed is small. Child of weakness, watch and pray. Find in me thine all in all. Jesus paid it all to him I owe. Sin that left a crimson stain, he washed it white as snow. Lord, now indeed I find thy power and thine alone can change the leper's spots and melt the heart of stone. Jesus paid it all Jesus paid it all to Him I owe. Sin had left a crimson stain, He washed it white as snow. Sin had left a crimson stain, He washed it white as snow. He washed it white as snow. He washed it white as snow. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised His life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised His life up from the dead. Oh, praise the one who paid my debt and raised His life up from the dead. Jesus.
So we were talking before church, and Kay was saying to me that she has really enjoyed this Genesis series. And, you know, I thought that was really nice of her to say, because I have enjoyed this Genesis series. I don't know about you all, but like I've been through the book of Genesis 100 times in my life, right? Read it, studied it, learned about it in Bible college. But this time through, I've really enjoyed as we've kind of framed it in the context of the gospel. We'll be bringing this series to an end actually next week as we wrap up our series in the book of Genesis. We won't make it all the way through the book of Genesis. Actually, that would be kind of fun because we're in chapter 23 today. And how many chapters are there? 50. So, I mean, if y'all are ready, I mean, I could do 24 through 50. I mean, we might be a minute next week, but I'm just saying, marathon Bible study, right? No, I'm kidding. But we will wrap this up next week as school is starting, and then we'll transition back to the gospel as we head towards Christmas and the celebration of the birth of our Savior. Now, we come to an interesting chapter today. If you want to open your Bible and turn to Genesis chapter 23, I'll give you a little preview, all right? Genesis 23, when you initially read it, you go, oh, Sarah dies, okay, Abraham's wife, so she passes away, and he buys a field. Whoopee! Great, let's go home. That's the story. All right, did you learn from it, right? No, obviously you know there's more to it than just that. There's actually a whole lot of meaning packed into this chapter, and it has a lot to do with God keeping and fulfilling the promise that He made to Abraham. So we'll dive into that a little bit as we get into it today. Obviously, there is the passing of Sarah, Abraham's wife, which brings up the subject of someone you love passes away. Now, when someone you love passes away, it brings up all kinds of emotions. If you've gone through that, I can think back to when my mom died, and I can remember preaching her funeral and just having the strangest emotional moment of my life. I've preached hundreds of funerals, right? But that moment, I still know that was an odd emotional feeling. I can think back of all the services I've ever preached, and of course that one's going to resonate with me big, right? It was my mom's service. But if you know me, like when Mom passed, ain't nobody else on this planet preaching my mama's service. That'd be me, right? Yeah, I mean, you know me, right? And when somebody passes away, it's lots of fun to tell stories about their life. And sometimes you find out things you did not know about the person. I found a video about a lady who passed away, and they found out something fun about her. Make sure we have sound there, Andrew. This is about Granny who passed away and the church dinner. So here we go.
Mom's about to tell us the story of the time she made dressing for the Baptist Ladies Luncheon in Andalusia, Alabama.
You ready? I had gone to stay with my mama to help take care of her before her passing. And they had a dinner at church, and she wanted me to make some salad dressing. So I got all my ingredients out, and I got to looking, and I couldn't find the vinegar, so I kept looking, and I found a vinegar jug, and so I poured it in there, mixed it up, and I kept thinking, this is the strangest smelling vinegar I've ever smelled. Well, Mama took it all to the church. She come back, there wasn't a single bit left. I said, well, my goodness, they must have loved it. And she said, they did, you'll have to make some more. And I said, okay. Well, when my mama passed, I had somebody to ask me about that jug of moonshine my mama had. I said, Mama ain't got no moonshine. She don't drink moonshine. He said, oh, I know she does. And he got to looking, and he pulled it out, and it was in the vinegar jug, and I said, that is not moonshine. He said, yes it is. Well, y'all, I had cleaned the house, cleaned the coffee pot, and even made dressings out of that moonshine.
And served it at the
And
church.
served it at the church, and everybody loved it.
I bet they did.
Yeah, they were plumb licking the bowls up. Needless to say, I didn't make no more.
So Granny was hiding something, Mama.
I'm telling you, I didn't know she was drinking moonshine, but she said she drank it for her arthritis.
There you go. So you always wondered why church dinners are the best. Now you know. Those mamas might be putting a little extra something in there, right? I love that. I thought that was so cute. Mama drinking her some moonshine. That was kind of fun. Well, today we're going to talk about the death of Sarah, as I've mentioned, Abraham's wife. The Bible doesn't tell us a whole lot about what happened after she died. It does say Abraham grieved for her, but it doesn't say if they had a funeral or give us any details of the funeral or anything like that. It just says she passes and Abraham grieved for her, and we'll look at that. Now, I think that's intentional because Genesis 23 is not about how to handle grief after someone you love has passed away. That is not what this passage is about. Like even if you were married a long time. And there are preachers out there, I found preachers out there that are like, Genesis 23, you've been married a long time, this is your chapter. No, this isn't your chapter, okay? Not unless you want to learn how to negotiate with somebody in order if you need to buy a cave where you're going to bury the person who passed away. Then you could learn about that. But this is not about you've been married a long time and now here's how you grieve. That is not what this is about. Genesis 23, as I mentioned, is about God keeping His promise. That's what this chapter is about. And something really important happens after Sarah passes away. So if you have your Bible open to Genesis 23, we've got 20 verses we're going to read. We're going to read the whole chapter. I need some readers who will read 5 verses each. Thank you, Emma, for starting us off. I appreciate that. She had her hand way high there. That was awesome. Who will do verses 6 through 10 for me? Y'all, I work with teenagers. I'll call your name. Bob Davis, okay? And 11 through 14? Mona? And 16 through 20. Who's going to wrap us up? Who? What?
We missed verse
15. It's in there somewhere. Okay. Mona. Okay. 16 through 20. Okay. In the back over here. All right. Let's read the story. Here we go.
Sarah lived to be 127 years old. She died at Kiriath Arba, that is Hebron, in the land of Canaan, and Abram went to mourn for Sarah and to weep over her. Then Abraham rose from beside his dead wife and spoke to the
Hittites. No, you're done.
Sorry.
Hear us, my Lord, you are a mighty prince among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our burial places. None of us will withhold from you his burial place, that you may bury your dead. Then Abraham stood up and bowed himself to the people of the land, the sons of Heth, and he spoke with them, saying, If it is your wish that I bury my dead out of my sight, hear me, and meet with Ekron, the son of Zohar, for me, that he may give me the cave of Machpelah, which he has, which is at the end of this field, but have given to me at full price as property for a burial place among you. Now Ekron dwelt among the sons of Heth, and Ekron the Hittite answered Abraham in the presence of the sons of Heth, all who entered at the gate of the city, saying,
No, my Lord, hear me. I give you the field and the cave that is in it. I give it to you in the presence of the sons of my people. I give it to you, bury your dead. Then Abraham bowed himself down before the people of the land, and he spoke to Ephron in the hearing of the people of the land, saying, If you will give it, please hear me. I will give you money for the field. Take it from me, and I will bury my dead there. And Ephron answered Abraham, saying to him, My Lord, listen to me. The land is worth 400 shekels of silver. What is that between you and me? So bury your dead.
And Abraham listened to Ephron, and Abraham weighed out for Ephron the silver which he had named in the hearing of the sons of Heth, 400 shekels of silver, commercial standard. So Ephron's field, which was in Machpelah, was faced Mamre, the field and the cave which was all in, and all the trees which were in the field that were within all the confines of its border were deeded over to Abraham for his possession, in the presence of the sons of Heth, before all who went before the gate of his city. And after this, Abraham buried Sarah, his wife, in the cave, field of Machpelah, facing Mamre, which is Hebron in the land of Canaan. So the field and the cave that is in it were deeded over to Abram for a burial site for the sons of Heth.
All right, let's start kind of tearing this apart. So when it comes to faith in God, there's one thing that's really, really big to God, that matters to God, and that is sticking to it, being faithful to your faith. Let me give you an example of faithfulness. Many of you know these two people, Billy Graham, obviously, and the gentleman in the corner is Jimmy Doolittle. I told you I read that book this summer about the raid on Tokyo that he led. Billy Graham was a faithful preacher until he passed away. His ministry was never about money or fame. If you know anything about Billy Graham, you know he would not travel alone. He would not travel in the company of another woman who was not his wife. He would not enter into a hotel room first, lest there be a trap set there to make him look badly. Never preached health and wealth. He preached the gospel. And when he died, does anyone know the coffin that he was buried in? He was buried in a pauper's coffin. It was a coffin made by the prisoners at the Louisiana State Penitentiary in Angola, Louisiana. He didn't want a big fancy thing. He said, I'm not no better than anyone who's locked up. Except for the grace of God, there go I. And so he had them make him the same coffin inmates were buried in. Jimmy Doolittle was the guy who led the raid on Tokyo after the bombing of the Pearl Harbor. He faithfully kept that mission secret through all the pre-planning that had to happen, because if it had been leaked and the Japanese had found out, the mission would have been doomed. He had to take off from an aircraft carrier 6 hours earlier than they had planned, which meant they were going to be 6 hours short of where they eventually had planned to land the airplanes. They knew they were going to crash. They knew they weren't going to make their final destination. He faithfully took off first anyway and led the raid. After the raid, which he survived, not everyone did, but he did, he personally wrote letters to all the airmen who were pilots and crew on those airplanes. He contacted the families of every one of his men. He reported what the men had done, and he reported what happened to the men after the raid had concluded. He visited with the families faithfully until his death and fought for his men to receive awards and proper combat pay. He supported his men until his death. 2 examples of faithfulness. Faithfulness is big to God. It matters. Sticking to what you believe, walking with God. And Abraham and Sarah are examples of faithfulness. Now, they didn't have perfect lives, right? Nobody does. But they walked continually with God. This is a story about Abraham's faithfulness. It's also a story about trust in God and His promises. Over and over in this chapter, you're going to see this point made. And the point is, Abraham is going to own a piece of property in the promised land. That's the point of Genesis 23, and it matters. Okay? Abraham's going to receive a small piece of property in the land of Canaan, and that little piece of property is going to serve as a pledge, a down payment, the beginning, are you ready, of Israel today. Because of what happens in Genesis 23. Now, let's go back. Let's go back and remember our history. The promise to Abraham way back in Genesis 12, we talked about earlier in the summer. God said to Abraham, you remember what He said? Yo, Abraham, pack your bags, time to go. And Abraham said, yes, sir, right? So Abraham followed God, didn't know where he was going. And then in Genesis 12, verses 6 and 7, the Bible tells us Abraham and Sarah traveled throughout the land as far as the site of the great tree at Morah, at Shechem. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. The Lord appeared to Abraham and said, to your offspring I will give this land. Genesis 23 is Genesis 12, God keeping His promise. All right? Now, let's talk about the reality of the situation. When Sarah dies, what does Abraham own in this land of Canaan where the Canaanites live? What's he own? Nothing. Nothing. He owns his tent, his animals. I mean, he's a rich man, right? He's got lots of animals, herds, flocks, and all that stuff. He owns what we call in real estate personal property. It's the stuff that goes with him wherever he goes. But he doesn't own any real property. He owns no land. He had been living his whole life, ever since God had called him to follow Him, on the move, as a nomad, a wanderer, right? And he had waited 25 years for God to fulfill His promise of a son. Remember that? We talked a lot about that, right? And then he went through the test we talked about, where God asked him to give that very promised son back to him, and he was obedient in that. And now, here we are, Sarah dies, and Abraham doesn't own any land in Canaan. It's like this. God has fulfilled half of the promise. I've got Isaac, but I don't know how are you going to give me this land? I don't own any of this land. And yet, if you've been a Christian very long, if you have followed God at all, you know this one thing, that God specializes in impossible things. And often, when you most don't think it's possible, is when God is working in a certain way, when you're standing there going, God, it's not going to happen. It's exactly in the works to happen. That's how God works sometimes. This chapter is a hinge chapter. It connects Abraham from being a stranger in the land to owning the land. It's a hinge. I own nothing to now I own property. Okay, this is a really important, as I've mentioned, chapter in the Bible. He goes from being an outsider to being an owner. And that was everything in that land and in that culture and in regards to God's promise. Now, Genesis 23 breaks down really into these 5 parts, okay? Just a couple of verses for each of the 5 parts. Sarah passes away, he mourns, there's negotiations over the property, he overpays for the property, and then becomes a landowner in the promised land. Now let's walk through this account quickly today. Obviously, we'll start with the death of Sarah. If you've picked up anything through this series this summer, you've picked up that the book of Genesis connects way over in the New Testament to one specific book. You better remember what book that is. We've referred to it lots of times. Hebrews. The book of Genesis and the book of Hebrews are connected together. And in Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 13, the author of the book of Hebrews has been talking about Abraham and Sarah a whole lot, and talked about how they left home, they followed God, they lived in this foreign land where the Canaanites lived and they were foreigners there, and how they were too old to have kids, but God had given them this promise, and then they had a child after they should not have been able to do that. And then the author says in verse 13 this. The author says, by the way, he's been talking about lots of Bible people. He says, all these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance, admitting that they were foreigners and strangers on the earth. Okay, question, test time, pop quiz. Hope you studied. How old's Sarah when she dies? Anyone knows? Nah. They taught you wrong at Bible college. You should get your money back. Sorry. 127.
What I said?
You said 47.
No.
Quit mumbling. 127 years old. That would mean Isaac would be somewhere around how old? Anyone want to try and do the math?
He would be 27, 26.
37?
So most Bible scholars are saying like 36-ish. Okay? I don't know if that's true. That's just what all the smart Bible people say. Now, interesting side note here. You guys ready? This is so cool. I did not know this. You ready to pick up something you want to take home with you? Here it is. You ready? Sarah is the only woman in the Bible whose death and age at death is recorded in the scriptures. The only one. Isn't that interesting? I did not know that. Here's another interesting thing to learn here. Are you ready? Fellas, men, guys, pay attention. Andrew especially. Okay. What I'm about to say is not for the women only. This is for us as well. Okay? Y'all, here we go. Another interesting thing to learn here. The Bible never tells us to follow the example of Mary, the mother of Jesus. Never says to imitate Mary, the mother of Jesus. But are you ready? Twice it instructs us to follow the example of Sarah. Isn't that interesting? Let's look at those verses real quick. The first one is found in Isaiah, the Old Testament prophet. In Isaiah 51, Isaiah says, "Listen to me, you who pursue righteousness." That's a big fancy way of saying you who are walking with God. Okay? You who seek the Lord, look to the rock from which you were hewn and to the quarry from which you were dug. This is symbolic, picturesque language. Isaiah is talking about the fact that your foundation, your ability to do life, your walk with God, your renewal of your soul, who you are, the foundation core of who you are, comes from Jesus, the rock, right? Don't miss that, right? Look to Abraham, your father, and to Sarah, who gave birth to you in pain. When he was but one, I called him, and then I blessed him and multiplied him. Isaiah is teaching the people of Israel here to look back to the story, the account of Abraham and Sarah, and to remember the promises of God that were made to them, which is why the Israelites, the modern day Israelites, when Isaiah was writing, were even alive. They were the children of Abraham. They were his family. And Isaiah saying, look back to the promises God made to Abraham and Sarah. You're alive because of those promises. That includes us. Spiritually, we're the children of Abraham and Sarah, right? That's what the rock from which they were hewn means. Sometimes we need to look back in the same way that Isaiah was telling the Israelites to look back and remember the stories of the foundation of our faith. We need to look back to the stories, the accounts of the people in the Bible, because remember what we learned last week and the week before? Those accounts are there to teach us how to walk with God, right? I read this week that a person without the knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. Sometimes you need to remember your roots. The second verse in regards to remembering Sarah comes from, anyone know where the second one is? No.
1 Peter.
Good guess. 1 Peter. Andrew cheated and looked it up. 1 Peter. 1 Peter 3. Okay? Peter, the apostle of Jesus, says, it is not fancy hair, gold jewelry, or fine clothes that should make you beautiful. No, your beauty should come from within you. The beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit that will never be destroyed and is very precious to God. In this same way, the holy women who lived long ago and who followed God made themselves beautiful, yielding to their own husbands, like Sarah, for example. Sarah obeyed Abraham, her husband, and called him her master. And you women are true children of Sarah if you always do what is right and are not afraid. Okay, stop. Because some of you women are right now, and rightfully so, fellas. Some of the women are like, I'm not calling you master, Mr. Man. Right? I'm with you, women. Good call, okay? Don't be building your husband up like that. Don't give him that big old ego. You don't need that, right? I'm just kidding. No, anyway. What God is saying here, and Peter is teaching, the important point of Peter's teaching is that you are a true child of Sarah if you do what is right and are not afraid. Okay? Now, this whole calling Abraham master thing comes from the culture of the Old Testament and that time. We live in a much different culture today. But don't miss this. Everyone listen, don't miss this. Sarah is a poster child for wifedom. Okay? What Abraham put that poor woman through, y'all, you remember the stories? Hey, honey, we're going over here into Egypt. You just pretend you're my sister, okay? Right? And you know as well as I do, Sarah was going, Lord, the man's out of his mind. Right? You know she was. And yeah, what did she do? She's like, honey, I'm trusting Jesus right now. That's what she was doing, right? And that's the example that Peter is pointing out here. Okay? What Abraham put her through deserves to be recounted, and how faithful she was along the way. That's the point, right? So, let's keep going. Second part, Abraham purchases a grave for Sarah. By the way, I thought that was interesting. The Bible encourages us to follow the example of Sarah twice. Isn't that interesting? This is verses 3 through 6. So now Abraham approaches these people who live there. They're called the Hittites. By the way, if you read the Bible, the teenage version, as Emma illustrated for us, you can call them the hippies, but they're the Hittites. Just kidding. Just kidding. The Hittites, okay? And he asks to purchase a piece of land where he can bury his wife Sarah. So how do they respond? What's their first response to Abraham? What do they say? Bury her, my man. We are happy to let you bury your wife here, right? Now, why is that a problem? That's right. Because how much are they going to charge him to bury his wife in their land? Nothing. Not a dime. We don't want a shekel. We don't want anything. That's important because he's an outsider. And if he owns land, he's not an outsider any longer. Notice in verse 4, He even says he's a stranger in verse 4. Now, what's he say in verse 4? Someone read verse 4 for me again.
I am a foreigner and a visitor among you. Give me property for a burial place among you, that I may bury my dead out of my sight.
I am a foreigner and a visitor among you. That's the technical, legal term he's using in this negotiation, okay? He is saying, I acknowledge I'm a resident alien here. I have a green card, is what he's saying. I don't live here. I'm just hanging out for a minute because my God told me to do that, right? I don't have any claim to any land here. And he's saying to these people who do own the land, who are from there, this is their country, would you do me a favor by selling me a burial plot? Now, he knows he does not have the right to go in and demand that they sell it to him. He knows that, okay? What do the Hittites not want? They really don't want Abraham or anyone else to own land in their country, okay? Because once he is a landholder, he's going to have rights under the law, okay? And they really don't want a bunch of people coming in and buying up their land. You might feel the same way, because right now, many of us are like, yeah, whatever. You might actually feel the same way and just not realize it. So, for example, we have a lot of people who are crossing our southern border and coming into America. Maybe you're like, you know what? I don't want them coming in here and taking what is ours. Think about it this way. Let's put it another way. When white European settlers came to America, do you imagine the Native Americans were really overjoyed about us coming and doing a land grab? Probably not. How about this? What if somebody moves into your neighborhood of a different ethnicity who you can't relate to? And then their family buys another house, and then they buy another house, and next thing you know, you're the stranger in your neighborhood. Would feel kind of weird, wouldn't it? Right? So that is how the Hittites felt. We're protecting what is ours. We don't want outsiders owning land here. And now let's talk about this offer. Verses 7 through 11. Abraham persists in his quest to get property for Sarah's grave. What property does he suggest he could buy? Did you pick it up in there? Which one is it? It's mentioned. How about the cave? The cave at Machpelah. Okay? Now, does Ephron the Hittite offer to sell that cave to Abraham at first? No. He offers it. Yeah, he offers to give it to him, right? Or to let him use it, or to give it to him. He even actually offers to give it to him. So Abraham in verse 7 very politely bows before the elders of the city and revisits his request. Y'all, we're in a negotiation here, okay? So, Abraham has asked for land to bury Sarah. The Hittites have said, we'll let you bury her. And Abraham has said, well, how about if I buy the cave? And the owner has said, I'll tell you what, I'll just give it to you. And now Abraham has come back, and now he's in front of the elders of the area, say the city, the town, if you will. And this time, he makes a specific suggestion of the place, and he names the owner. Now, this was a really good strategy on Abraham's part, okay? He knew that by speaking in general to a group, he might not get as warm a reply or response to his request as if maybe he identified the property and the person, right? Because if he identified the potential seller, that potential seller could what? If he sells the property, he could benefit. He could make some bucks, right? Okay? So he mentions the name of the person from whom he's willing to buy, and he offers how much for the property? Full price. He doesn't dicker for a discount. He's like, look, I'll pay up. Okay? I will pay you the cost of the property. But he says explicitly he wants this cave. He'll buy the field, but really what he wants is the cave to use it for a burial site, right? Now, something to know here, something to learn. You ready? If Abraham had been able to buy simply the cave, under Hittite law, he would have no obligation to the Hittite king in the area. Do you think the Hittite king would be real happy with that? Everybody say no. Because what's the Hittite king going to be collecting that Abraham wouldn't have to pay? What every government collects, it's your favorite thing to pay on the planet. Taxes, right? Yeah, so Abraham would have been exempt from taxes, and that ain't going to happen. Okay? So Ephraim makes a seemingly generous offer. He begins by saying, oh, no, Abraham. No. You don't need to buy the cave. I'll just give you the field. See, so nice of him, isn't it? Question. Is he being sincere? No, not at all. He's totally insincere here. Because what he's really doing is bargaining with Abraham. In fact, it's really a bargaining match, you all. See, what you don't know is the behind-the-scenes stuff, so let me give it to you. Are you ready? By mentioning the field, Ephron is basically asking Abraham to give him a price. In other words, what are you willing to pay me to buy the whole thing? If you ever watch American Pickers, like one of the greatest shows on TV, hello, these guys go and they buy rusty gold. They always do what when they want something? Do they throw the price out, or do they get the person to throw the price out? They always try to get the owner to start the negotiations because they know that way what the owner's ballpark number is and if they can buy it or not, right? So let's talk about the acceptance of the offer, verses 12 through 16. So this haggling process goes back and forth. Abraham finally becomes a landowner in the land of Canaan, and he agrees to overpay for the property, but not at first. At first, he refuses the offer from Ephron to give him the field. Anybody know why this is important? Again, this is some behind-the-scenes stuff here. You ready? You ready for this? Once Ephron dies someday, if he gives this field to Abraham, Ephron dies. Under Hittite law, Ephron's kids could come and demand the return of the land back to their family. And Abraham knows this, you all. So he agrees to pay a fair price for the land because he doesn't want to lose the land. You think about it. You create a graveyard for your family, and then 20, 30 years later, you lose the land. That would be terrible, right? Abraham doesn't want that. So immediately, the Hittite takes advantage of Abraham's position. What does he say to Abraham? He says, my Lord, listen to me. The price of land worth, say, 400 shekels. What's that between two men like you and me? Let me put this in plain English. You ready? We are men of means. In other words, we're wealthy. We've got money, which means lots of cattle and sheep and all that stuff, right? In other words, Abraham, I'm rich, you're rich. Think of like if Warren Buffett is talking to Donald Trump, and they're saying, well, Donald, I know you want to buy the building, and I own the building. How about $100 million? I mean, that's nothing to people like you and me, right? This is the kind of conversation that is happening right now, all right? 400 shekels, why, that's nothing, Abraham. You can afford that all day long. Anybody remember what Jeremiah would pay for a field in Israel about 1,500 years later? It's in Jeremiah 32. Just for comparison's sake, you ready? 17 shekels. So is this a bunch of money? Yeah, it's exorbitant, okay? It's like the price of a 2x4 right now. Just don't go buy one. It's really bad, okay? So is Ephron asking Abraham to pay fair market value, below market value, or above market value? And not just above, y'all. Way stupid above. I mean, just way high up there, okay? It's a huge price. You think Ephron, just this is speculation, we don't know, but who thinks Ephron was thinking, Abraham's gonna haggle with me? Okay, who thinks Ephron thought Abraham would take the price? Because I don't. I don't think he expected it at all. No one thinks anything. That's exciting. Okay. So we're just really tuned in today, I can tell. I was just kidding. Abraham's response takes Ephron by surprise. He immediately agrees to Ephron's price. I was watching this TV show last night before we went to bed. It's called American Pickers. Maybe you've heard of it. It's like this greatest TV show ever. And they were picking this guy somewhere, I think it was in California. And the guy had like some scooter that was super rare. And it was in like 14 parts, and I mean, in the guy's attic, you know, something you and I would be like, waste of time. But it had a lot of value, it was super rare. And so Mike, the guy on this show, says to the owner, how much for the scooter? Just the pieces you have. And the guy threw out a price, $6,500, and immediately Mike goes, I'll take it, and put his hand out. The guy wouldn't shake his hand, because immediately he didn't want to sell it. He did not expect that response. That's what happens. That's this situation right here. He immediately agrees to Ephron's price. And what does this mean for Ephron's family moving forward in regards to this piece of land? It's gone. They can't never get it back unless Abraham were to sell it. They can never demand it back on the grounds that they had been given a less than fair market value, which you could have done. If Abraham had underpaid, they could have got it back. In Hittite law, if there was a land transaction of less than market value, and then the descendants of the seller's land ran into hard times, they could sue to get the land back. So Abraham makes sure that can never happen. He establishes ownership on this parcel of land in Canaan. Now, interestingly enough, we have an actual description of the property. It seems kind of weird and unnecessary, doesn't it? But it is important in verse 17. For instance, it talks about trees. If you'll read verse 17, it says there are trees on the property. Like, who cares? It matters, okay? That's actually important because the mentioning of trees are in the boundaries and the details in verses 17 through 20. These are characteristics. Listen, that mention of trees affirms the truth of the Bible because archaeologists have gone and found other Hittite contracts outside of the Bible from that time period, and they are written the exact same way as this contract. There is always a description of what's on the property. How cool is that? You can trust the Word of God. When we find, I just said that. Let's see. All right, well, let's talk about the application here, okay? I'll give you something to think about. Stay with me here because we're kind of jumping ahead for a minute, but I'll tie it together. By leaving their bones in Canaan, the people who were buried there gave their last witness to the promise of God. Let me explain. In Genesis 50, we go way to the end of the book of Genesis, chapter 50. Joseph is dying, and he lives where? He's in Egypt. He lies dying in Egypt, and he says, God will surely take care of you, and you shall carry my bones up from here. Joseph didn't want to be buried in Egypt, did he? He wanted his bones brought back to the land of Canaan and buried with Sarah and the others who had been placed there. And so are you ready? Sarah, Abraham, Isaac, Rebekah, Leah, Jacob would all be buried in that cave. the first foothold of ground owned by Abraham in the promised land. Now, I didn't bring a picture of it because I don't know that the location is exactly accurate, but supposedly, if you ever go to Israel, you can go to this place where this cave is. There's a building over it now, and you can see the place where they're buried. I don't know if that's the true place or not. I didn't bring a picture, but if you want to see it, you can do a Google search for burial site of Abraham. Hebrews 11, verses 9 through 10 and verse 16, really important as we kind of think about how this applies to our life. Author of Hebrews says, by faith Abraham lived as an alien in the land of promise, and as in a foreign land, dwelling in tents with Isaac and Jacob, fellow heirs of the same promise. For he was looking for the city which has foundations, whose architect and builder is God. And then in verse 16, the author says, they desire a better country, talking about these Old Testament people, that is a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. And so this is a story, Genesis 23, about God keeping a promise. Maybe not the way Abraham thought God was going to keep his promise, but let me ask you a question. How many times does God act in the way that you think he ought to act? Because he doesn't act in the way I think he should act a lot of times. And guess what? He's God and I'm not. Right? It's a story about fighting the good fight, trusting in God and in his promise, and waiting on God. And being willing to do life God's way, which is the really hard part of faith. Right? Abraham bought land as a down payment or start of the promised land. And here's my question for us today. What are you establishing for your family, for God in their life? What are you putting as a down payment for your family? Now, let's make sure we don't get this wrong in how we're thinking about this. Okay? Because what we tend to think about is, well, I bought a house and I'm going to pass my house and my property to my kids. And that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a down payment of faith. Kind of a faith down payment. Are you leaving for your children, your grandchildren, for some of you, your great-grandchildren? How about this? For an unborn generation who will never know you as you are today. What are you leaving for that person? What kind of a down payment of faith are you leaving for that person? Maybe you've never thought about that before, right? Let me give you some examples. Down payments of faith are things like when your grandchildren is in your house and they see your Bible sitting there. Or a picture of Jesus. Yeah, lots of pictures in your house. Got a picture of Jesus anywhere? These are down payment kinds of things. Or how about when you tell somebody, a grandchild, a child, about how God worked in your life? That's a down payment kind of a thing. I want you to be thinking about that today as we prepare for our response. The worship team is going to lead us in our response. I have a paper that I'm going to pass out. Andrew, will you help me pass this out right quick? And Emma. You don't have to use this paper. You can take your own. This is just an idea I came up with. You'll need a pen if you're going to do it, or a pencil. But it just says, Dear Blank. You could put a person's name on there if you want to write this to somebody and leave it for them. Or you could put in the blank, you could put future family member, person born in 2050, whatever. It's got a couple things. It says, I want to give you something very special from me to you. My hope is that these words will help you to establish faith in God in your life for your entire life. First, here's why I believed in God. They're going to read this after you're gone. Secondly, here's how the Word of God helped me in my life. And then third, here's how I knew that God is real and the Bible is true. Now, you're not going to have time to fill all this out right now. Maybe you need just to start to put some thoughts on it today. I want to encourage you to think a lot about that. And finish the letter at home later and then put it in an envelope with their name on it, whoever it's for. And then buy a Bible and put it in the Bible and put their name on the Bible. And put it somewhere where they will receive it when it's time for them to receive it. Or put it in your Bible and leave it behind as a down payment into their life. Or maybe this is something that you need to write out and you need to go take to them today. You need to sit down with them and say, you know, I've never really told you about my life and my faith. I'd really like to sit down with you and just have that conversation. I've written this out for you. Can I talk to you about why faith in God has been important to me and a really important part of my life? What kind of a down payment are you making? Abraham bought a field. God was working in a miraculous way for that to happen. But that down payment became the nation of Israel, the fulfillment of the promise. Listen, that's why you're sitting here today, because Abraham bought a field. What down payment do you need to make into somebody's life? That's really the question that I want you to think about and grapple with as we move into our response time. We'll do communion during this time. You all know how this works. You take communion when you're ready. We'll do offering at this time. If you've not brought your offering yet and put it in the plate, this would be the time to do that. To remember God, who remembered us on the cross before we ever knew who He was. So lots to think about during this time. You can sing along. You can write your thoughts down. Participate in communion and offering. But let's make the teaching of God practical into our lives during this time as we respond to the teaching of the Word.
He became sin, who knew no sin, that we might become His righteousness. He humbled Himself and carried the cross. Love so amazing. Love so
I hope that you'll take the challenge seriously to make an investment into somebody's life, a deposit, a down payment of their future faith in the Lord, and because of your influence into their lives. We will have the board meeting not tomorrow, but a week from tomorrow. Diane's got to get all the reports done, just got the financial statement, so we'll have that next week, fellas. And now, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face towards you and give you peace. You are dismissed. We're going to be in there. Don't break down. No, you can leave it up. Sorry.
Fight.